Hi, and welcome back to our continuing series of meditations on our unfinished American evolution revolution in a global light of reason, and seen from the wisdom of our planet, the scriptures, enlightenment, teachings, all in quest of the missing code of the fundamental field, the source code. And we've suggested so many amazing, astounding findings in the light of this lens that opens up the source, that allows us to see the connectivity, the unum vision. And what I'd like to do in this follow-up, after our third meditation, where we focus deeply on our unfinished American evolution, revolution, and looked deeply into placing the language of our founding visionaries' 1776 Declaration of Independence, and to see that if we really saw it was tapping the code, the wisdom code of the planet, that has been with us for 2,500 and beyond, 2,500 years. And to see that in that space, if we read it and understand it and find the code, the missing code, the deep code for the amazing meaning in our 1776 founding document and documents in constitutional way. There is no doubt that it is a way of dialogue, the way of wisdom, the way of freedom, life, liberty, well-being, safety, security. We're noble individuals, and we can become mature humans when we cross from the spaces of division under the sway of a regime and technology of self-making and culture-making and world-making that has been blocked in the space and cutting off from the source and direct access to the source and the source code. And so many powerful themes have been opened up. You must be reeling with all kinds of questions. And I'd like to, in this follow-up reflection on Meditation 3, take up some of the typical questions that come up, the most frequently asked questions on this question of an unfinished American evolution revolution. And it's revolutionary, as I suggested, because to call into question what is not visible, the invisible human crisis, and relocated the American example in a human drama across the planet. All humans and cultures and political forms are facing, all cultures and religions are facing, are we under the sway of a mind operating process, a linguistic form of using our lens of our mind and making our worlds that can be holding us captive and cutting us off from access to our flourishing and blossoming as noble, individual, free human beings in the well-being and flourishing of happiness, which is well-being. This is a place of being. This is a place of reason, the light of reason, the infinite LogoSophia. And all our great scriptures and Enlightenment teachings are all converging on this ultimate axiom that reality is an infinite force. It's an infinite field. It's infinite, whatever name you use, and therefore it's infinite in every name, in every way. And it's infinitely one. And therefore all diversity is within that space connected. That's the Pluribus Unum. This is huge. The pluribus is the multiplicity of all worlds, of the cosmos within that unifying force. And that's the light of reason. It's non-sectarian, it's not tribal, it's global in the sense of all possible worlds. That is stunning. To realize, and our great teachers are all been converging on that space, and that's the space that allows dialogue, dialogos, enter the logos. We need the code of LogoSophia to enter the logos. And that's the culture of deep dialogue. Whereas if we're cut off from the source, we're going to be suffering existentially, ontologically. And we've suggested that source science, the fundamental science, first philosophy is the first science, because if you get the code of all codes, the source of all codes, you've got the DNA, so to speak, to understand any narrative, any worldview, any paradigm, any culture, any scripture, including our declaration and our constitutional thinking. It cannot be outside of the space, the infinite word, the infinite logos space, where all worlds and cultures and narratives and forms of life are emerging. And if it's under the sway, and this is one of the most important, astounding findings that's new in source science, and gaining access to the source code, the missing covenant, the code of source, of the infinite force, the logos code, the Sophia code, the God code, the Allah code, Yahweh, Christ, yoga, Buddha, all tapping the Dharma, the law, the code, the logos of reason. They must all come from the same source. That's the Unum force. And the Unum force is the force, the infinite unifying force that allows us to make links and connections. And if we're delinked, if we're cut off from that Unum, we are delinked. And we fall into radical separations by the very nature of the motherboard that's controlling our lives and our cultures and our religions and our human relations and our political life and our education and our love life and human relations in every way. If we're broken and objectifying, and the thinker, the experiencer, always interpreting with her lens and creating a world as an object, the subject who's thinking has an object, and there's a divide between the subject seeing an object, and we objectify and create an it. We objectify our life and our phenomena, and all that appears in that space is objectified. And everything that the Declaration, for example, and all of our great scriptures say, when we rise to the occasion and enter the flow of the continuum of being, of love, of life, of intelligence, of logos, where the lights go on in the mind, the place of enlightenment, which is our birthright. It's not for an elite few, it's for all humans, our logos sapiens, not ego sapiens or mono sapiens cut off under the sway of this regime that creates a deep crisis and suffering and fragmentation in all kinds of ways. This is not sustainable. So what I wanted to do in this follow-up is just to reflect and catch our breath and look back and look more deeply into these amazing, astounding themes that are new and not seen in this light of a global, rational intelligence and source code, a code that takes us here. To go from here to there, to cross this line, requires each person to access the code, to say I am, truly say I am, not say it here, but to be I am when we cross. And that crossing comes when we call into question and recognize that we are under the sway and our lives are dominated and we're held captive in all of our experience and culture making and religious life and scientific life and educational life and political life under the sway of this motherboard that is a smotherboard, and we need to go deeper to get the Unum code and open this up. This is where we become true individuals. So I wanted to just think about what are some of the issues and questions. This is a messy picture, I know, but it's a messy situation in a way, but we're trying to say, this is our human condition, this is our evolution. Let's say 3,000 years of the genius is calling us to rise to the occasion of entering the compassionate space of ethics, of reason, of knowledge, of faith, and human relations, and nonviolence, and peace, and well-being, and happiness, and nirvana, the heavenly space. And yet we're cut off and remain in the space where we're divided of many different narratives and worldviews and belief systems, and we can't find our way. And this is our political, civic life is here, in monologue. And this is the place of dialogue. This is I, it, and this is I, thou. Here are some questions I'd like to ask that frequently come up, and I'm sure it's on your mind. If the Constitution, the opening of the Declaration, which I shared with you last time, and I suggest we could put it here, in this place of reading, which is where we put all of our texts and scripts, and read it with the lens we have, and that we know, the literacy we have here. But if we see that the Unum space, that this wonderful document that we treasure as sacred scripture in a way, our founding visionary axioms and principles, that's coming out of this space. If it's here, then have we really encountered the 1776 founding document in its full medical force, ontological power, in the light of Logos, is a question. And the question is, how do we go from here to there? That's a frequently asked question. How do I let go? The how-to question. How do we, individually and collectively, as individuals and as cultures, as a collective, call into question a regime of thinking and self-making and culture-making in every aspect of our lives? All of our cultural life is under the sway of this technology. It's a technology. It's a code. It's a code that cuts off from the deeper code. So the unfinished American Revolution is a call to code. The Declaration is saying that if there's any political band that brings us together, a human social political convention that brings us together, that compromises our freedom and dignity and right to life, liberty, well-being, and safety and security, it is our right to separate. And we said in the prior meditations that that call to separation, which is the opening of the 1776 Declaration of Independence from this. And if we're looking at here and just misdiagnosing what it's calling us to separate from any political band that holds us captive and colonizes us. We want to decolonize the mental civic space. Being colonized is not just an external force upon us, but an internal culture-making regime that holds us in a colonial, tribal, localized, broken off from the source code where we become true individuals, sacred, dignified humans. So we think we're individuals here because we have my identity. That's not true individuality. The great teachers knew that. The self, the ego-based, monocentric self, made an object. We objectify ourselves and process ourselves in this technology of information about ourselves. We have our ID. That's not our individuality from source science, from deep ontology, the science of being. We become individual, undivided. The word individual means not divided. But when we're here, we're cut off from ourselves. This technology cuts us from our deeper presence. It cuts us from source. It cuts us from the universe. It cuts us from nature. It cuts us from each other. And we can't meet the other, the I and other, here in that sacred space where we are already interwoven. The self is not an atomic separate entity. It's an interrelational flow. That's true individuality. And one of our greatest treasures on the American way and the American ethos is individuality, sacred individuality. Each person is sacred in her individuality and diversity and difference. We want to treasure the sacred diversity, and yet without giving up the sacred unum and connectivity of one nation, one people, one polis, one civic space, united in its vast diversity in the unum pluribus technology of deep dialogue, not monologue. So several questions come up. If that's our unfinished American Revolution evolution, and it's revolutionary as I suggested, because it is a revolution to say, I'm not going to live under the sway of a motherboard technology and convention that is cutting me off from access to myself and my human rights and my well-being and liberty and freedom. This is the place of freedom. This is not free. If our civic space and our culture is here, we are not free. And the great teachers know this. It's headline news across the planet. Freedom comes with stepping into the open space of the unum, of the light of logos, the light of reason. When we gain autonomy, autonomos, giving a law to ourselves, the logos law, the logos code, that is the law of autonomy. That's the ethos of deep dialogue. That's the American way. That's a human way. To be human, this is dehumanizing. If our culture is dominated by these technologies of objectification, which reduces us from who we are and preempts our true individuality. So individual means undivided, unbroken, whole, integral. How do we get that? We've got to enter the American way, the way of logos, the way of reason, the way of coherence, the way of deep dialogue, sacred. Civic space here is whole and integral and flowing and nonviolent. There's a peace zone, it's a love zone. It's a knowledge zone, it's a faith zone, it's this sacred religious. So the ecumenical is sacred. The highest ecumenical space of the unum pluribus is sacred space. We don't have to call it religion. Religion, as an ideology, has to rise to becoming truly sacred. In getting the code of logos, getting the code of God, the code of Christ, the code of Buddha, the code of yoga, Om, Tao, Allah, It's here, the code, not here. So one of the disclosures that's astounding, and that's a new vision of saying who we are and where we are in the light of global wisdom and enlightenment across the planet. The great endowment of our wisdom teachings calls this out. We're always in the zone of infinite space. The infinite is ever surrounding. And anywhere we are, if we're severed and alienated from a deeper intimacy with Source, with God, with being, with reality, because reality is here, opened up in this lens that is unum pluribus, then the call of wisdom is, it's our duty to separate once we get that. And we haven't gotten this. That's one of the main points. Our teachings were seeking urgently to get us across and creating portals, the yoga portal, the Buddha portal, the Christ portal, the Moses portal, the Lao Tzu portal, the Socrates portal into the Logos. But when we process it here, it gets divided and broken, and Allah is over here, and Yahweh is there, and God, and Christ, and Brahman, and Tao, and it's all broken. We cannot find the Unum. So that the Unum is the code of unity and connectivity, where everything is profoundly interconnected, infinitely interwoven. And if we're cut off from the Unum, we get shattered into broken shards and shards of cultural subcolonies. Subcultures that are each an ideology. That's what ideology is in the science of ontology. To understand that our worldview, when it's in this space, becomes an ideology, a belief system, a paradigm, a narrative about reality. We have narratives about reality. And we have so many different narratives competing for truth. This is a place of truth and meaning that gives us the truth about reality here in our worldview and where everything appears to us. But if we're using this lens under the sway of objectification, unbeknownst to us, we're breaking the circuits and cannot re-see the other. If I see the pen here as an object and I put it here and meet it there, if I can meet it there, I've got to drop this motherboard and open up into the space of the Logos. And our wisdom teachers and scriptures are calling us to that. Surrender to that. Let's surrender this, release this, separate from this. That's what the language of 1776 is urgent to do. Separate from this so we can rise. So what I wanted to do in this follow-up meditation is to hear it and see how serious and how deep it is. Because this crisis is not just here is another crisis. It is the fundamental crisis facing humanity for centuries. It's not new. It's been haunting us for centuries, and our great teachers have been seeing it in different ways, but it has not been fully brought out because we didn't fully get to the Unum power, the Unum code. Where does that come from? It is a simple, rational axiom that the infinite must be infinitely one, Unum. Not one here, not unity here, but infinite Unum. I'm using the Latin. And that Unum, because it's infinite, it's infinitely diverse, and that diversity cannot be shattered and scattered as it is here, but it is woven into beautiful music and harmonious interconnectivity when we get into the source space. Diversity is sacred. And there's where we have our individuality. Each person is a sacred miracle, unique, and yet connected. Because we're not separate, broken off, which is what we get here. It's not authentic individuality. Because it's individual. Humans here are individuals. And humans here are individuals, non-divided. Whole, integral, woven in, I thou. A human is an I thou being. It means that the thou is in us. And we can't break off from it. So to tend to the self is to tend to the other. And to tend to the other is to tend to the self. And that's a political space of mutual self-care and care for others. Compassion. And that's ethics. Because here, if we're objectifying the other with our lens, we're slashing him or her. And that inherently is a form of violence. So we can't thrive here. We cannot have life, liberty, happiness, well-being, safety, and security. It's going to break. And if our civic space, which is here, our civic cultural space is here, under the sway of this sheer dominant technology of making our culture and our world, so talk about it, information-based, rather than entering into the source, where we're flowing in the zone, so to speak, then we are in deep crisis. a question of survival and thrival and sustainability. Because if this is we the people, and we can't be we because this is broken into different ideologies and colonized diversities that are separate, and therefore each having its own truth, and there is no unum, then we remain broken in monologue, and monologue undermines the sacredness of democracy and the civic space. We can't be civil. We can't be, in this civic space is going to lead to a fighting for dominance of one ideology, or even cluster of ideologies, but it's still going to be an ideology or clusters of that's going to dominate the truth and the public space and governance to the exclusion of others who don't share that. And that leads to totalitarian tyranny, despotism, sparked by this the dominance of this technology. Excuse me. So one of the big questions that has to be raised is if this vision of source vision, unum science, source science begins to show this and reveal this and show that our great teachers and scriptures were speaking to this condition and urging us to move out of this crisis, existential crisis, ontological crisis, medical crisis, because we're suffering here and we cannot flourish. We cannot find truth because there's no unum to hold the diversity. So if we have different paradigms or different languages or different models or whatever you want to call it, or belief systems, and we can't find the unum linked to dialogue, then we hit walls. So the medical clarity of source medicine, deep ontology medicine, looking at the human condition here and seeing that everything is going to keep getting fragmented and polarized. And so if we find our culture is divided across deep divides and polarizations and alienation and fragmentation, that is a human disaster. And if we're using this unwittingly, this technology, as we raise our children and our school system and our civic spaces with this technology of objectification and separation and not see the link. And why don't we see the link? Because we need the unum intelligence, rational coherence, connectivity to see and make the link that, wow, the world we're living in is a result, causally, of the dominant technology of culture making. That is so deep we can't see it. And that is the depth of the crisis. The invisible crisis is that we're looking here at the problems that we're facing and we don't have the diagnostic tools of deep science, of source science, and the unum vision of our wisdom and Enlightenment tradition that allows us to see that every narrative is coming out of tapping the source. We couldn't be apart from the source. And yet the technology that dominates our lives is breaking and fragmenting and separating into ideologies. And if we can't have dialogue here, we can't have dialogue in the Middle East or anywhere. If across our divisions and worldviews and ideologies and our belief systems, we cannot truly dialogue and have monologue with each other. To enter dialogue, we've got to loosen this up. This is a barrier, and the lens that we are using to make our world under this situation, if we can't detach and separate from this, we're going to be stalled. And the best we're going to get is monologue, not dialogue. Dialogos, deep dialogue. And that's educable, that's learnable, it's teachable. It's our destiny as all humans have a right to be here, a right to life, liberty, well-being, nobility, sacredness, love, communion with the source, communion with reality. That's our birthright as logosapiens, not monosapiens in this space. So the questions abound. I'm just trying to follow up with all kinds of questions. If our constitutional 1776, for example, is one moment is capturing the voice and saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All humans are created and sourced with unalienable rights to life, liberty, happiness, and all the great teachers sing, this is where is happiness. This is nirvana. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. All of those stories speaking about the space that's awaiting us to mature from this stage of our development where we have this information obsession and addiction and we don't realize there's a deeper, more powerful form of our language, of word power, And that's one of the questions obviously going to come up for all of us. What happens when I take a word from here and place it in the space with a double bracket? Lens, when I have that lens, that code, when I'm I-aming, when I'm zoning, when I'm zenning, when I'm Christing, when I'm Buddhaing, when I'm yogaing in the Om space, how do I see? How do I speak? How do I relate? How do I love? How do I flow? What is the Gandhi secret of the Atma, the Satyagraha, the truth force? This is the truth force. The force is with you. The Unum force. Pluribus Unum force. That's here. That's what America, that's the American way. The American way is not here. It's to find our way into the nobility of individual sanctity and sacredness together as people, as individuals. A polis, a community, a culture, society, a nation in this space is sacred. This is sacred space. Because we have to be heads up. The revolution is, the unfinished revolution is, if our 1776 revolution is calling us in the Declaration of Independence, which in a deep meaning is not just independence of an external imposed monarchy upon us as an external rule, stage one, but how about an internal monarchy, an internal colonized mental cultural space, that we must liberate ourselves and to open up the civic space into nonviolence. How do we go from here to there? Is it only for a few, or is it educable for all the people? Well, when we see that this is a technology that awaits us, to understand this level of English, you could speak English here. But if we cross into the source English, or any other language, let's playfully call it Zenglish, Zen, when you're zenning, when you're zoning, you're using language, but in a much more profound, interconnected intelligence. Every word we have here, when it gets upgraded and rectified into the logos of global reason and global light, of awakened mind and being heads up, then that's the unfinished human revolution for all humans. And that's the call of our great wisdom, teachings, and scriptures. Surrender this, detach from this, so we can enter and discover the bliss of being, whatever name we use. So when we see that democracy cannot flourish here in broken ideologies, in the ideological mind, where whatever our belief system is going to be my way of seeing it, it's my truth, and you've got your truth, and there'll be alternative truths. And if it's a broken down the middle culture of two subcultures that have different worldviews and values and different constitutions and different American ways, how can we be governed? To speak to half of this subculture is not going to deal with others, and it's going to be unsustainable. We've got to find our way out of ideology. Ideology is deep. It's not a particular ideology, but the ideological mind and life and culture is dominated by talk about it. Use your lens to render the information of your worldview and your phenomena and experience in this space, which creates monologue and breaks the circuits of deep dialogue. We are born for dialogue. We are dialogue sapiens. We are I-thou beings. We're being busted. Our being is being busted into monologue, stifled, smothered by this motherboard that's holding us captive. Is this a place of safety and security? Homeland, let's talk about that. What is the greatest danger for the flourishing and sustainability of our homeland democracy, let's say in the American, for all people, but in American civic space? If the civic space is indeed broken and separated into unbridgeable chasms across sub-worldviews and subcultures, and it's a cluster of pluralistic, multicultural, multi-colonized worldviews, and we don't have the skills of dialogue, which means you can't get it here. You've got to go into the dialogos, into the logos, to meet the other. Not with your imposing your lens and slashing the other with this technology and objectifying the other. We can't meet the other here. There's no meeting, there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no mutual care. There's a violation of objectifying nature, our environment, each other. This is the Tower of Babel. How do we then cross together, individually and collectively, into the space of I am? Heads up, awakened mind, awakened life, enlightenment, rational awakening. If we're logosapiens, we're rational beings, and reason here is stifled by a technology that's immature. And to go into a higher intelligence where we can feel the interconnection between space and time and mind and word and I and thou and mind and body, all of these broken pieces here begin to, you feel the PowerPoint of interconnectivity. That's teachable. That's what Buddha is teaching, that's what Jesus is modeling, that's what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. That's what Socrates, Plato, Aristotle are trying to get the language of first philosophy, the logos, wisdom in the culture, so we can have justice in the polis, as Plato. All of these great geniuses are trying to get the literacy for this language. But when we swallow it here, which is what we do because this is our dominant literacy here. And when we download it here, we conflate the two, and if they're conflated, we're stalled. And our greatest activism attempts here to solve the problem cannot work because, as we've seen for centuries, because you can't use what's within this technology to solve problems that are created by this, where the way to medically solve it is to let go, separate. The call of the 1776, separate from any regime that captures us, that's implanted within us in a mind operating process. If we're swallowed a cultural smotherboard that's holding us captive and not allowing us to flourish as noble human beings in a rational space as civil and civilized, then it's our duty to separate. And there's going to be tyranny and despotism, because if you don't have dialogue and it's monologue, which monologue narrative is going to dominate the cultural commons? And if one unilateral narrative begins to dominate, even by half of the population believing in it, then it's going to be a tyranny, a tyrannical, rather than we the people, by consent of the governed. There is no we the people here. So when you look at the election process, right, election is a great right to cast a vote. One human, one vote. It's not a power play among factions and subgroups that are marshalling to take over control of the government. That is not democracy. That's not the American way. It's not our constitutional axioms and principles. The logos of our founding is here. And if the American way is here, but we can't see it, then how can we hold and fulfill the call to our constitutional American way? That's our unfinished American revolution. And it's an unfinished human revolution for all humans that are still laboring under the sway of monocentric, immature reason, and immature language, and immature lens and interpretation practices. So what is homeland security? If this is homeland, and the greatest danger and the gravest danger for our flourishing in democracy, which must be here in dialogue. Deep dialogue is deep democracy, and deep democracy is compassion and care. In diversity and individuality, we flourish here and not here. So this is ontologically, from source science, this is an urgent crisis, and it's been with us centuries. It's festering and getting stronger and stronger, but it's always been there. The brokenness across our cultures and worlds. It's not a dismal picture, because what we pointed out last time, that whatever we're doing in our history and our multiple narratives of history, what's going on in American history, knowing that there are multiple historical narratives unfolding in the space, and isn't it great that we freed the slaves and women can vote, and these moves and end segregation, and hold the Union together with the Civil War, Lincoln and Gettysburg Address, and a more perfect Union. Without Unum, it's not possible. A more perfect Union is to go into the Unum space, a continuum space of civic life and culture and deep dialogue. That's the sacred. One nation, indivisible, in the Logos, with liberty and justice and dignity for all, and human rights and being. Happiness. Happiness is here. Happiness can't be here. We can't be slashed down and objectified and find true meaning and truth and vision and faith and spirituality and love in the space. That's the crisis. So we can't be safe. This isn't safety and security. So what is homeland security? We better do our homework and our own work and start to really become aware. If there's any activism we urgently need in the American scene and across the planet, it's to come to more clear awareness that we're blinded because we're looking here and we're not stepping back to say, wow, what is dominating our lives that leads to this ideological clash of civilizations and cultures and world wars, code wars across our belief systems, Holocaust and genocides, racism and sexism and homophobia, all of these isms, misogyny and mythology, sphere of logos. We saw it's being generated by the deep objectifying slasher. We're living with a slasher, deep implant as a thought form, a code that's an anti-code of the integral unit of dialogue. Monologue code violates and cuts us off from dialogue coding, life coding. So how do we step back from that? That's what all our great teachers are teaching. Buddha, this is suffering and we don't have to. Yoga, Krishna, this is suffering. Let's find a way into the Om code, the Om script, the yoga code, the Mahatma Gandhi space, where we can bring that into the public space to renovate it, in the Gandhi's case. Bring the truth force into the political chaos and brokenness and tyranny and colonization to liberate the people. And to remove an external imposition of a force is not yet to do the homework that every human must do to really become aware of a motherboard, that it's a motherboard, and that we have a choice and we can move and rehabilitate our minds and our cultural language and intelligence in the light of reason. When we tap the Unum force, the code of all codes, in the Unum Logos light, of awakened mind. So practicing the art of heads-up mindful life is the deep dialogue art that brings us across from this cave of violence and insecurity. This is not homeland security. And it's not just the external threat of a terrorist out there or even infiltrating in here. That's the only problem. That's a grave problem. That's part of the planetary sickness. Terrorism. The clash of ideologies, which comes from here. But if we're living with this ourselves, then we've got to face that crisis as highest urgency. If we keep pointing to a misdiagnosing within here, we're only going to misdiagnose what the real source of the problem in finding the American way is going to be, because we have to step back and get the science. The first philosophy, the science, the wisdom, to see the picture. As Plato would say, until we get the logos, the wisdom, there will not be justice in the society. This is right. So when Martin Luther King, in his revered speech, I Have a Dream, he's dreaming of crossing from here. We're going to get there one day. I may not get there with you, but we're going to get there. Where? To the American dream, the American way, the sacred space, where our diversity can be honored, but in an honorable way, not in a broken, separated way where we can't have truth and coherence and consensus. In diversity. Diversity is sacred. Individuality is sacred within the unified sacred space. That's Pluribus Unum. E Pluribus Unum. One of the axioms and inscriptions of the American ethos, which is an amazing breakthrough. So these are some of the questions that come up. So if our Constitution is here in the Unum space, which it obviously is, or at least there are two ways to approach it: here as information, or realize it's tapping into the wisdom of the planet and the light of reason, which is self-evident, that all humans are created and endowed with a creator. All that talk has got to be here. It can't be here. If we don't know, we're cut off. We can't write. And if we just erase all of this, if we erase all of this and just go here, and this is where we're getting it all, then we're really stuck. So this is opening it up and saying, look at our situation in the eyes of the wisdom of the Logos code. The code here, the double bracket code, is a deeper code of the source. It's a covenant. It's a code of God. It's a code of Dharma. It's a code of reality. It's a reality code. That's the covenant. And the ark of the covenant is here. It's not here. And if this is the Titanic culture, if this is the Titanic space, so to speak, it's not sustainable, and it's shot through with leaks and holes, and that's a danger. So whatever we do about fighting terrorism, for example, which is a legitimate threat from all sides, but from inside, if we're already broken in this technology, when we have a whole integral that our great teachers are calling for, let's find our way to the American way, then we've got to do some homework in a homeland security. That's a great danger, because our democracy is not in healthy form. It's a broken democracy. Our being is broken. Our persons, our humans in the civic space is busted and fragmented. To get to the whole integral civic space, to become civilized, and people speak about making it more civil. You can't do it here because this is an uncivilized technology of objectification and slashing. It's violent. And if we become aware of this and see, wow, I didn't realize how violent this is to objectify the other and not allow the voice of the other to show up and to put and objectify one another and our children. It's an abuse. It's a human abuse. It's a self-abuse. And our great teachers saw that. And we're calling us urgently, and we haven't gotten this. And all of our attempts at activism here is not solving the real source medical problem of this. We've got to get out of this to heal and to become whole. The activism has to have activision, unum vision, source code, in order to see this and then do something about it. That's activision. Activism here is myopic. And it hasn't worked. And it's urgent. How long can our democracy in the present state, in America, for example, continue? How long can we continue in the Middle East with Palestine and Israel, given how we're stalled and can't find the way to peace, the human space? Or wherever we find intractable objectification across the planet, the brokenness in Syria, right now, all of this has been going on. Holocaust and genocides, ethnic cleansing, all of these disorders are the virus, the cultural virus of the mind operating process of objectifying. When we objectify each other and the other culture and the other religion and the other world, and we objectify, it's not long before violence, the deeper form, that's already violent, but a deeper form breaks out. And it's explosive. So if we want to tend to homeland security, we've got to look at this condition of our homeland, of being divided against each other, as we deal with other issues of security. Because the language of the Declaration calls us to overthrow whatever regimes that hold us, or codes and conventions that hold us captive, and compromise our dignity and freedom and individuality and life, liberty, happiness. And this becomes a despotism. It's despotic. Because it doesn't have the link to truth. Without the Logos link, you don't have truth. This is broken. Without the unifying force to hold it together in coherence and rational light, we don't have truth. So what we have here is opinion. And if we get a lot of people to agree with our opinion, and we can spin it out and make it look true, and speak your truth and counter-truth, and have alternative worlds and alternative facts, so be it. That's the game we play. That's called sophistry in philosophy. Socrates drank hemlock for sophistry. Why? Because it wasn't tapping the Logos. He knew that this was not knowledge. Knowledge is over here. He just said, I didn't have the knowledge, but I know this is not it. And that's why Socrates was said to be the wisest human. Because he saw this in some way, and he saw we had to go to the Logos. And that crossing was to leave the cave. It's as if people are living in a cave, and we've got to go into the Logos to know thyself above all else. That's Socrates' version of it. So these are some of the, I'm in a way repeating some of the points we've gone through in our meditations, but I wanted to share with you a moment to just reflect again and absorb it. How do we move from here to here then? Well, because we have to see this, that we're operating under, we have to see the motherboard that's deeply implanted that I couldn't be aware of, become aware of it, call it out. And when you see it and says, I don't have to do this, to see the science, that this is causing devastation. That's new. It's old because our great teachers are seeing it. Why does Buddha see suffering? He didn't say because we have a motherboard and it's a smotherboard. He said, existence is suffering, it has a cause, we have a choice, and we can rehabilitate. He didn't say check out the motherboard. So people say, okay, Buddha was going after the ego, but the ego is a symptom of the objectifying board. He's not just going after this or this, he's going after this and this to get us to rehabilitate our technology, which is teachable and learnable, to be heads up and mind up and Zen, which embodied wisdom, the Sophia, the LogoSophia. When you're living the Sophia code, then you're in deep dialogue. Deep dialogue is a teachable art rather than monologue. Are we raising our children from the earliest days to know the skills of dialogue and sensitivity and lensitivity? Open up your lens in multiple lenses. In a multicultural society, we need deep dialogue to understand how to cross borders and not be violent with each other and to listen in the I-thou space. This is where dialogue and meeting takes place and love. And that's another point that came out for us, that relations here are broken. Single bracket relations are artificial. Father and son, lover and beloved. These are relations. I and you, relations. But when you go into the deep space, Unum, that's where relations, the relational flow, the links, that's where interlink is happening. Love, intimacy, connection, compassion. Double bracket relations are state of the art. Why? Because it's the Unum flow. Reality is unuming. And when you are I-aming, we are entering into the deep relationship of this sacred space, of I-thou, all around me, interwoven. And every word we have here, when we cross, it becomes interrelational. So this is the law of interrelationality. And that's what the source of interdependence is. Not codependent, but interdependent. Why? Because of the unum pluribus axiom. So notice that if we could pull off the unfinished American, unheard American Revolution, it's not that we've done it. We've done the 1776 thing. The British were removed, and we became free. And the 13 colonies could be the United Colonies of America. But the colonized colonies are still separate. What makes unity? Unity, to get real unity, you got to go into the Unum unified space to be United States, United Colonies. The united ideologies of America, the united cultures of America, the United Nations, the European Union. Anytime we try to form a union, an Unum, and we're trying to do it here, it's an artificial relation. But to tap real love, we have to leave the monologue lens and mind and technology and move into dialogos, dialogue. And you can find your beloved open to you, I and others, beloved. Listen to your child, listen to the other. Look at the Van Gogh painting, let it speak to you. Everything around us is a miracle in this space. This is a sacred miracle space. Everything is miraculous. Why? Because it's being sourced. And as we saw, every point is connected with every point. So every human is sacred individual in this space, connected with the entire field through space-time continuum. We've got urgently to activate this language. And since we are logosapiens, not monosapiens, but this is our rational heritage. We have a right to reason. Our narratives of human reason, use R for reason here, under this is still broken off from the source reason, getting to the source of the logos light. This is global reason for all worlds. And that's when we're in global reason. We're flowing with each other in compassion and ethics, and that's the moral law. This is not morals. This is not ethics. To get ethics, you've got to go into the I-thou, the law of interrelational compassion, not objectifying each other. So I'm trying to develop further some of the questions that frequently come up. Why is activism stalled, if it is? And what is activism here? And what is the activism that calls this out? What I'm suggesting is, how do we deal with this medical emergency that's getting increasingly unstable and unsustainable as the fragmentation grows? And the cultural implosion of the pulverized, fragmented civic space is not incoherence. It's incoherent. It's not coherent. Coherence is here. How do we deal with that? We've got to find a way educationally to call this out, to see it, listen to the teachings of the centuries and the scriptures, call this out, let it go, and cross over and rehabilitate our cultural language, our languaging, our dialogue space from monologue to dialogue. That's learnable, that's teachable. Why? Because it's a code. And code is learnable, teachable, par excellence. The code of reason. We are rational beings. This is our birthright, to activate this code and become awakened, flourishing, well-being, happiness, life, liberty. If we can see that this is still slavery. So when Nietzsche, the philosopher, said we've got to go beyond good and evil, to become an Ubermensch, a human, to step back from this slavery into the... He was groping for what we're speaking of here, for example. Different talented genius minds have seen this in different ways, but it has not been fully called out because we haven't really seen the most elementary axiom of all, that the infinite is infinitely unum. That's a game changer of them all. To realize infinite unity, as I said in the last meditation, it means that the infinite is here. The infinite is always here, already, right on the American land, this great land that we sing praises to. This land is my land, this land is your land. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies. All those songs, I pledge allegiance. One nation under God, indivisible. All of these mantras that we use are really, we're called to go to the American way of compassionate, moral, awakened, mindful, heads-up, rational life in the civilized civic space for all humans and all cultures and religions and worlds. If we're here, we're in ideology, and ideology cuts us off. It becomes my opinion, or our opinion, shared opinion. And we could have subcultures of ideologies. And to change the ideology is not going to get us out of ideological colonial mind. Ideologies are colonized. They're colonized cultural subcultures. And to decolonize is to let go of the slasher, the technology of slashing and objectification of information dominating our lives, to get into compassion and deep dialogue. So that's why I never brought it out, and if you have a chance to follow up and look at a declaration, when I read the opening of the 1776 opening words of the Declaration of Independence, I was moved. I was reporting when I drafted in 2012 a global declaration of interdependence. Coming out of independence is interdependence. We the people, a global declaration here. Because if we accomplish the unfinished American Revolution here, and can let that go and separate from that, and enter into the awakened civilized space of deep democracy and rationality and ethics, and the American way of the noble plurality of diversity in sacred space, then what will we find? Interdependence. The declaration, to accomplish the declaration of separation from this motherboard, is a prerequisite, the highest activism urgency for homeland security and saving our democracy, which is unsalvageable here, under the sway of this, is to move into dialogue, deep dialogue ethics of rationally awakened mind, together as a people into that space. And there we have interdependence. So I realize there are many other questions. I said last time that how do we, if this is our activism, to face our invisible crisis, to realize how severe it is, and that it's millennia, it's been festering for centuries. And it was that festering that led to the founding of leaving the persecution and hardships of the old world, so to speak, and coming to the new world, which started in profound violence and objectification of the other. And in the early founding, to see that we need to make a passage into a new way of life, to birthing the holy experiment into democracy. So I've posted my Declaration of Interdependence as based upon and immediately following from the Declaration of Independence, to become independent of this space. that is colonized and not free. And to move into this space is to discover our deeper interdependence. What would that declaration be like? Let's pause for a moment. I'd like to read again. In the light of this conversation and meditation, the opening words of our declaration of July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, the United Colonies. And please listen to it with the ears of the American way here, understood here. And that the independence is of any form or political convention or codes or that bring us together, not just external impositions on us, but the technology that holds us together as a culture. If we are independent of that, it's our right and duty to make this crossing. That's the American way. So when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station, separate and equal individual, to which the laws of nature, source, and nature's God, the entire field, entitle them, we're entitled to this from the source. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind, global, requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to separation. We've been declaring the causes that impels us to separation. It continues. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them these: life, liberty, and happiness, pursuit of happiness. And this is amazing, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So governments are instituted by humans in this life, liberty, happiness, deriving its powers from the consent of the governed. This is amazing, that whenever any form of government or self-governance of our culture becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such a way, such a form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's homeland safety and well-being. And this is the place of being and well-being. It continues. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments, long established, should not be changed for light and transient causes. Conservative. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So if we're accustomed to certain forms that are causing suffering and abuse, we tolerate it and suffer it as long as we can in a conservative. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security, safety and security and well-being. That's amazing language. And in this meditation, I've been suggesting that there's no way we can read this amazing vision and call to separation in this colonized mental space. But we must put it in the global space of logos, in the self-evident space, which is the path to the American way. I hope you will read my Declaration of Interdependence. I will make it available. It's been available, but if you read it, I'm not going to do it now, you'll see why the Declaration of 1776 leads to the 2012 Global Declaration of Interdependence. There's so many more questions. For example, if this is a fractal living word, because when you cross from this language into this space, the living Zen space, the Christ space, the Buddha space of enlightenment, right? You can't have a static document. The gospel of Jesus, understood as a story, tell the good news. But the gospel here, the gospel speaking, in the living Christ, I am the way, the truth, that's the way, the truth and the life. Life, liberty, happiness. The Christ language is here. The Christ code is Unum code of deep dialogue. So that code that flows here is bringing out and opening the interconnectivity. And you might ask then, if that code, the Buddha code, the Dharma of Buddha, is a law of interflow, where everything is interconnected. That's another version of the same law. How do you know that? The Unum, that all of these great teachings are under the Unum force, and therefore they bear the Unum code. And if you know that, you could be able to see that the Christ code and the Buddha code and the God Yahweh code and the Allah code and the Tao code and the Om code, all of these codes are tapping the infinite Unum pluribus flow. And that is a moral law. That is a law of nature. That God's nature, whatever language you're using, there are many ways to speak that without losing the Unum science. So if our documents that we know are scriptures, I read the Bhagavad Gita here, I read the Buddha here, the Four Noble Truths, I read the Quran here, I read the Descartes' meditations here, when he's precisely leaving this and moving into the I am in his meditations. But we don't know this, and we only read it here, and we're blowing it, because when this gets conflated into this space, we are deeply stalled in a chronic way. So to deconflate the two languages, the two codes, so this code is different from that. Listen to our teachers. We need to deconflate it to see it. And when you see it, it changes the entire scene. That's new. The point I'm making is that if the constitutional thinking is tapping this code, whether it's the Christ, Buddha, the Logos code, the code of reason, right, which it clearly is, that doesn't make it wishy-washy. The fact that it's a living, when Jesus, I'm the Word, it's a living truth. The Buddha is a living truth. It doesn't die. It can't be fixed. It's not static. When it becomes static, it gets killed. It gets frozen in this space. Our sacred documents are here. And because they're here and they're filled with living meaning, it means that the 1776 lives now. The founding axioms and principles of 1776 are now. For all of us, we the people need to constantly, regularly, steadily co-found ourselves. We're co-founders now in this space and time. It's not a done deal. And then we now look at the frozen past. It's living now. Let there be light of Yahweh. It's not an old dead event. It's now. It's flowing now. Let there be light. Let there be enlightenment. Let there be humans. The birth of humans is happening now. So the point I'm making, when you realize the power of the code, of these living documents that have to be embodied, you have to I am it. You can't treat it as information, as a static dead place on words on paper. It's got to live, as Jesus was saying. It's got to live in your heart. The law of love has to be performed in the I am, I thou. It can't be talked about. The Buddha truths cannot be put here. The yoga truth cannot be put here. We can do all the yoga we want here, but it's not going to get us into yoga, the yoga of yoga. That's here, and so on. But it doesn't mean that it's wishy-washy, because the constitutional law is that whenever any regime cuts off our sacred humanity and life, liberty, happiness, that's unequivocally clear. This is freedom for all people in all worlds. This is happiness, well-being. This is the place of being. The science of being shows that being in the box is not being. Being is boundless, and therefore it flows. It surrounds all of these worlds and cultures and narratives are artificially constructed by our lens and by our traditions. And it uses the resources of the source. It cannot not. So we're always under the influence, living under the influence. But the law, the Dharma of Buddha is living. It's a living law. And that means when you're heads up, when we are heads up in the moment and we face new circumstances, we know how to show and live the wisdom in that moment. We can zen it, we can zone it. And the zone is always around us. So the point I'm making here, one of the questions is, if our constitutional axioms and principles and code, logos code is here, is it subject to fragmented readings, or is it really a powerful, commanding, fractal script and scripture? Are the words of Jesus wishy-washy? No. I am the way is a global truth. Buddha's truth of interconnect is a global truth. It's not wishy-washy, but it has to be lived. What I'm suggesting is we can't look back to 1776 and say, oh, well, that's our constitution, and we've got to follow that because we're interpreting it. And if we hadn't had the code to get it in a deeper meaning that's obviously here, then have we really fulfilled the 1776 call to separation for all people? If we're following Buddha's teaching, have we accomplished the separation that Buddha is calling for, from the ego-based monocentric space into the Buddha space? Have we listened to the call of Jesus to enter into the Christ code of Logos, of Yahweh, of love, if we're still here and we're being Christian here? If science is getting the Logos and tapping the Logos and opening up awakened intelligence, and we're still here doing our science, are we still in ideological science that is lodged with opinion and broken off from deep knowledge? Those are very serious matters. It's a crisis. And it's an urgent crisis because it's active suffering. Just because we're used to slashing each other and objectifying each other and having broken relations, and we're living in nihilism and despair and medication. Not meditation, but medication to ease the pain. I mean, the culture is suffering all across the planet. And those are ontological suffering, existential suffering. Not just psychological suffering, but ontological suffering because we're broken from our being. Our being is broken. We're broken from ourselves, as all our great teachers saw. That's urgent, and that's a crisis, and that's an invisible crisis, and to make it visible is the key to activism. Because if we keep trying to fix it in here, we've been doing that for centuries, and certainly decades. Where has it gotten us really? It's good. It's good to tend to the environment. It's good to recycle. It is good to stop the nuclear proliferation of weapons and to denuclearize the situation. That's all good. It's good to try and find the peace in the Middle East. That's all wonderful. It's good to reinforce treating minorities as equals. It's good to open up rights and civil rights and human rights for gays. That's all good and important. And that activism is important. But if we're still lodged within here, have we overcome the racism really? Have we overcome the homophobia really? Have we overcome the mythology, which is being generated from the space of objectification? As long as we objectify each other and ourselves and other cultures and religions and worlds, we are caught in an ideological crisis that can only be solved by calling it out and rising to deep dialogue culture. So those are some of the thoughts that I wanted to follow up the third meditation. And this has been a kind of messy situation, so that feels so much better. Every point in this infinite field is interconnected. And even if we end up with a technology, for whatever reason, a motherboard, and a technology in which we have our screen of awareness and we're making our information in our worlds here, whatever we call it, and we're objectifying. The subject has an object, and all of our lives and culture and experience are happening here. But we saw before that wherever you are, in whatever lens you're using, and whatever worlds you're showing up, and all of our multiple worlds coming out of this technology, imagine the spectrum of different worldviews, narratives, ideologies here, in an ideological place that separates and divides. This is individual, this is individual. And we're asking about what would it take to kind of open this up? What would it take for me? Because my high self is already with me. We can never step outside of the presence, the infinite presence of Unum Pluribus, and to do this is what the call of our wisdom and the American way is, move from monologue to dialogue. Our high self is already with us. That's one of the questions, right, that I frequently get. How do we go from here to there? Well, you're already, your high self is already here. The technology, the activism is, you got to see this, and each person individually, and we as a culture, as a collective, need to really upgrade our literacy to dialogue, deep dialogue. And that's teachable. It's a code. This is one code, and you can replace this code with another. Think of the digital code. We didn't have the digital internet and computer world with its digital codes and logics. But when we got it, we could have the computer world opens up. Well, what about the codes here? What if you could get the Christ code, the Buddha code, the Om code, the Yoga code, the Logos code? LogoSophia code. The Logos, to use a Greek word. The code of reason. If we can get that code, which is our birthright, it's in us. We have that code. We are that code. And so since this force is always acting on us, we have high moments. I'm just trying to make it user-friendly. To one of our questions, is this for all of us? Is this for all humans? All Americans? Yes. All humans across the planet. Earthlings. Because we're rational beings. We're coded with Logos. The Logos code is within us. And that's this. The double bracket is the Logos code. The single bracket is the monocode on the way into the Logos. And so to just gesture of loosen that up, let that go, detach. The principle of detachment, let that go. And one of the questions that comes up when I'm teaching my students who know how to be in the zone, athletes love this. They relate to it, and musicians and performers who get into the peak performance and tap into the zone. That's a moment where this is always around us. So when the athlete is in the zone, she wants to know, wow, I was the running. It wasn't I was running. It's I be running. I am the running. I am the love. I am the soccer. I am the tennis. I am the basketball game. You're one. That's being in the zone. This is the zone. And we have spontaneous high moments when we get there. In altered states of consciousness and near-death experiences and all of these moments. Why? Because it's already dreams. When you have lucid dreams, we can tap the Logos. It's our birthright. And the question is, why can't I stay there? Why do I have these episodic moments of being in the zone? Can I live and constantly stay in a deep dialogue flow of heightened awareness in life? That's the call of our great wisdom teachings. And that's the American way. We've got to upscript, not downward, but upscript into the space. And the point is, it's educable. We need self-education. Our education is very much here. And our kids feel it. We all feel it. It's stifling to be put in the box and to open up free, open mind, open reason, rational intelligence, my full creativity. To blossom, I need to out myself from this space into the logosphere, the Om sphere, the Christ sphere, the God space, the reality space, being, into the being. That's what's here. So is it feasible? Yes. Can a culture do this? Yes. We need to educate ourselves and mutually educate for homeland security. We need to say, can we go from monologue life and culture and democracy to dialogue? How do we do it? And what is the activism? Because that's the medicine we urgently need to save this urgent situation that's unsustainable. And people are suffering. In recent events, people are the youth, a lot of anxiety, dis-ease, feeling dislodged, not knowing, insecure, unsafe. That's a good word. Many of our people, of our citizens, don't feel safe. And the Declaration was calling for if we're living in a space that is not safe and secure, in homeland safety, we've got to do something to really change it. And so the revolution is not one of weapons, it's one of love, it's one of a code, it's a code shift, it's a rational shift. It's moving from ideology into wisdom. From unenlightened, unawakened life to mindfulness. That's the revolution. That's our unfinished American, because that's detachment from slave minds and slave spaces and colonized tyrannical regimes, is to awaken. And that's the American way, to be awakened human beings, global citizens in a global space, living in love and compassion and care for each other and for diversity and for the planet and for nature and for other people. That's the American way. So I will end this version. There's so many more questions. I know that after my third meditation, I felt I just touched the surface of what we really need to do to answer so many questions and go deeper about security and safety and activism and the call of the power of the Declaration, if you understood the principles and foundation of the Logos that it's calling out. And to see why ideology is not just a particular, but the whole way, it's a whole way of using our lives, it's an ideological culture. We all have ideologies and belief systems, and to change a story is not going to change our location. The new story, when we hear from some of our coaches, we've got to change our story. We need a new, well, this is a new story. Getting the Unum Logos that's been there waiting for us to see it. The infinite has to be Unum. Pluribus. The Unum has to be pluribus. Infinite diversity in unity. That's just an ABC of source science, deep ontology, and captures the wisdom of our planet. That's been there. We haven't seen it clearly. And to see it is to open this up. So when we have wisdom and we wise up, we could see that this is down and this is blocked. And activism here is blind. It's not seeing. It's vision blind. Vision here is in a way blind. It can't see the deeper diagnostic. And Unum science gives us a deeper diagnosis of our human condition across the planet. In light of our great scriptures and wisdom, teachings and traditions. And it's grounded in science. All of those are grounded in the Unum axiom, that the infinite is infinitely Unum pluribus, and therefore all is connected in sacred space. And we're not in sacred space when we're using a technology that eclipses and blocks and cuts us off from access. So each person has to find her access code and password to cross into I am. And that's why the evolutionary force, which is not going to do it for us. We might kick back. We'll close on this meditation. We might kick back and say, okay, if we've been making progress and we freed slaves and women can vote and in ending slavery, and we had the Civil War, but we stayed together, and we are dealing with racism and segregation, and we're facing your gay rights and equal rights for women and men in our culture, and on and on. That's good. Let it continue, and we'll get there. We'll get there. No, we're not going to get there. It's not going to do us for us. A mother or a dad cannot say I am for any of us. That's why it's an unfinished American revolution, because a revolution is a political act of being. To be is to be revolutionary. To say, I will not live in this space. And so if we have popular songs like, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror. Which mirror? This mirror or this mirror? Which person are we looking at? This person or this? Which mirror? This mirror? Which mirror on the wall? Am I looking at this mirror from an ego lens and saying, I'm going to start with me and I'm going to do something about it here? That activism is foiled. If we want to start with the me in the mirror and understand the depth of our evolutionary mirror, then that mirror is saying, mirror, mirror on the wall, what do I do? What do we do? We've got to let go of the broken mirror, of the warped mirror that deforms us and cuts us off from flourishing as sacred individuals in sacred space. So what is the activism? We'll end on this note. In light of this missing story of the Unum source science, of our untapping the power of our great scriptures and seeing the power of our Declaration of Independence of 77 and all that follows, and to recognize that we're living under the sway and held captive by a motherboard that's a smotherboard and cutting us off, right? What do we do about that? If that's the greatest urgency for homeland security and the health of our democracy, because whatever threats we have from the outside, we have a great threat from the inside. And that is how we're conducting our minds. We're good people. We're rational beings. But if our reason is here, we're unwittingly objectifying one another and slashing each other and slashing the source, and it's unsustainable. So this diagnostic of source science, global source unum science, that allows us to see this is making it very clear. What next? What do we have to do to address our medical emergency in the life of our people? Personally and interpersonally and interculturally and in the civic space, to save our democracy and enter the American way and the way of the Constitution and the high nobility of the Logos Code. We're going to have to call this out. We're going to have to become aware of it. Listen to our great teachers. Listen to them with ears and begin to see, do I have a motherboard that's making my culture and my language and my meaning and my truth and my worldviews and my lenses going on here? And it's not working, it's broken. Why is it broken? Why is there monologue? How do we deal with that? We've got to call it out. We can't fix it within this space. That's the main point. Our activism here would be blind and blocked if you don't see a deeper activision. We need activision, source vision, unknown vision, in order to see medically the situation and then to correct it. How? Listen to our great wisdom. Listen to Buddha. Listen to yoga. Listen to Lao Tzu. Listen to Socrates. Listen to Jesus. Listen to Muhammad. Surrender to Allah. Surrender is to let go and surrender to the infinite force. That is Islam. That is Christ. That is Judaism. Moses and Abraham are calling us to Yahweh. Put this first, not this. That's the consensus of our great wisdom. He's calling us to upscript and not to download. So the greatest urgent medical activism is call it out, people. See it. Test it out. Ask if where we are is sustainable and healthy and safe. Is our democracy working or is it in shambles? Here. Is it just not Washington, D.C. is in gridlock? The whole nation is in crisis. It's not safe. It's not secure. And it's not just an outside thing. It's an inside thing also. And our greatest urgency now is to call it out and rise together with deep dialogue, education, and to self-educate and open our eyes and vision, our first eyes, our third eye, into the space to see where we are medically and to see the prescription, not just the diagnosis, but the prescription rise into the space of dialogue, dialogos, compassion, love, care, sacred space, honor the source. Honor nature is sacred. Every moment is sacred. Every breath is a miracle. That's where we need to live. That's the American way. And that's a global way for all humans across the planet. Thank you so much for staying with me, and I hope this helps. I'll continue in time. I know this has taken a long time. So at this point, we started with an opening prelogue or prologue to say, here's where we're going to go in our meditation. And then we went to the meditation one. It took over an hour to just open this up as a new vision of our global wisdom that we've never seen before. And then we went into a second meditation. It says, okay, let's look at the depth of the crises that we humans face and the challenge of this new evolutionary story that is opened up in the light of the infinite unum across all borders, and wisdom and scriptures across the planet. That was the second meditation. And then in transitioning, we did a 30-minute transition meditation to say, okay, let's go into the American scene. Even though this is a planetary call for all humans and all cultures, we continue to recollect the main themes. What are the main findings? The astounding disclosures of this, of the vision of the Unum Logos code. When we get the code, the source code, with the Unum vision power, how it has astounding disclosures that we couldn't see before. So we had a 30-minute transition. Then the third meditation, we went into the unfinished American Revolution. A more perfect union, a more perfect Unum, right? We can't find the union here. A more perfect union is, we've got to cross and fulfill what Martin Luther King called us to. He says, I may not get there. He means here. So in the American case, we see America is here, the American way, and America here has to grow up. And that's the call of the 1776, to let go of what holds us captive, to enter into the open, rational space of mature human beings. That's what awaits us. America the beautiful, the fulfillment of our American way, and the principles and axioms of our discourse and our constitutionality is here, and not trapped in this space. And that is a model for the entire planet, for all of us, to enter holy sacred space of democracy for all people, because we're all created and in this human dignity and liberated, free life, liberty, freedom, well-being, safety, and flourishing here in well-being. This is the place of being. So in this final fifth meditation with you, realizing how intense that can be and how many questions are stirred up and the urgency of the call, that our greatest activism now to save ourselves in an unsustainable, dangerous situation here, of brokenness and monologue, to move into dialogue, right? And there's an art and science for dialogue, teachable. We can teach each other and raise our children in the art of dialogue, the human art of being human. I myself, in forming my institute, the Global Dialogue Institute, about 20 years ago, I had a meditation, the 7 stages of deep dialogue. How do you go from monologue, being here and broken worlds, to cross into deep dialogue? 7 stages of living in the pathway into the American way, the global way, the human way. Deep dialogue is the art of it's teachable. And I've been teaching now my 49th year as a global philosopher, teaching at Haverford College, founded by the Quakers, who are calling us to the source. That's the founders of Haverford College, where I've been teaching philosophy, 49 years in global philosophy, and articulating this by living in these great scriptures and texts for decades, and seeking the missing logic, the code that they're in, that's calling us, and to, from that point of view, to see a deeper diagnostic. It's teachable. We can raise our children, and should raise our children, in the art of dialogue, sacred beings, in the love life of family, where we don't objectify each other. That's teachable. That's our great teachers. That's Buddha, that's Jesus, that's Moses, Muhammad. All of these great teachings across the planet. It's living in the pulse of African cultures, Ubuntu. I am because you are, that kind of human interactive, that's the I thou. It's all in our indigenous first peoples. We have it, but we need to call it out and see that we've got to let go of the colonized, tribal, localized way of being human into the global sacred space. So this final 5th meditation will stop now and try to go more deeply to kind of digest and metabolize the power of what we're talking about and the urgency of it. That what's next for us, whatever else we do, and we shouldn't discontinue our current activism or our life coaching or our spiritual practice. If you're doing yoga, do your yoga. If you're doing Tai Chi, do your Tai Chi. If you're practicing Christian, be a Christian. If you're a Jew, be a Jew. Be a Muslim. Whatever your spiritual practice, whatever your scientific practice, be a scientist. You don't stop doing what's working, but to let go of this motherboard is going to allow your science to blossom. It's It's going to allow your Christian love of Jesus and God to flourish. Your love of Moses and the laws of Moses to ignite with greater meaning in the burning bush of a deep dialogue space. Whatever your practice, whatever your activism, don't stop it, but do it now with open eyes in the source. Going after nuclear weapons, correct. Don't mutilate nature, correct. Don't pollute the waters, right. Let's recycle, yes. Let's eat organic, right. All of that's right. But when we're doing it here, it's myopic, and if we open it up, wow, to go organic is here. I thought this was organic. I am going to have organic, but it's objectified. But to go organic, what's that like? To realize that any taste of wine or any taste of bread, sacrament. The wine you drink here, when you drink it this way, it becomes sacred wine. The blood of Logos. And the bread, when you break the bread, it's the body of Logos. For example, our sacred rituals are not here, but they're crossing. They're rites of passage into the source. That's the sacrament. That's communion. If I'm going to be a Catholic, let me be a double bracket Catholic, because Catholic means universal faith. And universal means global, and global means unum pluribus. If I'm going to be a Catholic, let me be a Catholic. If I'm going to be a Jew, let me be a Jew. A Muslim, I'll be a Muslim. A Buddhist, not Buddha here, but Buddha here. Yoga, practice yoga. I'm going to be an American. I'm going to be an activist. I'm going to make this better. I'm going to work for love. I want love, not hate, not fear. All of these things are right. Keep doing it with all our heart. But let's release the binders that are restricting and myopically diminishing the power of what we're doing. We want to go from single bracket activism to source activism. Activision. It takes activision to have powerful activism. And that's what Gandhi was modeling, for example. Gandhi, tapping the Atman, Mahatma, great Atma, was tapping the source, the truth force, and bringing it into the culture of oppression and colonized life. To liberate it, to tap that, to harness this and bring it here, that's activision. So keep doing your passion. Let's love our kids. Let's raise them with dialogue. Let's love nature. Let's realize every moment is sacred. Let's have happy Valentines. Here, this is a place of love, not objectifying each other. Let's keep doing that and open it up. So to drop this is to open it all up. Let's do our science. We need the science. We need to find the cure for cancer. It's miracles that have happened in medicine. And not just allopathic scientific medicine, but non-Western medicine, acupuncture, other forms of medical healing, integral medicine. This is the integral space where all our worlds are meeting, all our medical technologies. Let's keep building the internet and wiring the planet with dignity and grace so we can link in. That's wonderful. All of that's great. In fact, these are gifts of the source. We couldn't do anything without the source. We couldn't get internet without intranet. This is the ultimate internet. The source is woven together. So when we're getting the technology, this is an amazing gift from the source. The source is sourcing us to get the medicine, to get the telecommunications, to get the web and LinkedIn, to get the cell phones. But not just the technologies in this sense, but the human technology and art of deep dialogue where we can finally cross into peace and find peace in the Middle East and every place that there's battle of broken worlds fighting, we can find the peace. So we want peace studies, we want peace, global peace right here. It takes intelligence and literacy and the code. We need the code to get the peace. Efforts here have been blocked. It's a détente, it's a compromise, it's temporary. It's artificial. It's not real peace. It's not real love. It's not real intimacy. Because when you cross into this, you go into sacred space. Every moment, every breath is a miracle in this space. So that's a thought I'd like to just conclude this meditation with. And thank you so much for staying with me. And I hope this was not too much. It was too much. But we need it. And I am going to continue to bring reflections to share with you and unanswered questions that come up constantly. So these 5 sessions is really, after almost 5 decades of work and teaching, is initiating a new attempt to reach out through the internet and videos and YouTubes to we the people, to my friends around this nation and around the planet, to share what I find with utter passion and urgency. And you could ignore it and just blow it away and go and take your favorite pick of whatever speaks to you, that's fine. But I feel the need to share it with passion and urgency, and I hope you found it beneficial. And just know that I'm devoting every breath of my life to bringing this collective wisdom of the planet out, the source wisdom, the unum science, the unum pluribus, to the planet in the teaching art. So thank you very much.